Hi, and welcome to the final day of our 25th annual Tualatin River Bird Festival and our second virtual bird festival. My name is Bonnie Anderson, and I am with Friends of Tualatin River National Wildlife Refuge here in Sherwood, Oregon. We are the nonprofit that supports the refuge.
And my name is Todd McKinney with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I'm the lead park ranger here at Tualatin River National Wildlife Refuge Complex. Bonnie and I are the co-chairs for this event and have been the co-hosts over the last yesterday and today. And we've had a lot of fun and are excited about all the things that have gone on. We'd like to take a moment to thank all the committee that helped put this on, the staff and volunteers and other partners that made this virtual festival a reality.
And all of the participants. We've just had some amazing sessions yesterday and today. We have one more session later on after this one, and you can find the link to that webinar on our website, which is www.friendsoftualatinrefuge.org. Look for the click for Zoom webinar button, and you can click on that and it will take you directly to the webinar. Or if you go to the events page, there'll also be a link there.
Since we're using a little bit different technology, maybe than you're used to with regular Zoom, we're using Zoom webinar. We just want to give you some information. At the bottom of your screen or your phone, you'll see a feature called Q&A, and that's how we're actually asking questions today. So once our presenters are going, feel free to put a question or two in there. We might be able to answer them during the talk, but more than likely they'll come at the end at our Q&A session for our panelists. And today we're about to get underway. Hopefully you're in the right spot. We're going to be hearing about Wapato Lake National Wildlife Refuge live virtually. We have some panelists on scene. We're going to check in with Refuge Manager Larry Klimek and Refuge Biologist Curt Mykut to learn about the restoration happening there and to hear about some visitor experiences that will hopefully be coming in the near future. We also have the Mayor of Gaston, as well as Alan Christensen from the Friends Board, who will be on scene as well as special guests.
And then our last segment, we'll be wrapping up the festival with the inspirational sounds of Latin America by artist, storyteller, and musician Gerardo Calderon. Gerardo filmed a special presentation for us from his studios in Mexico. And this presentation is filled with music and information about the Andean condor. We hope that you have enjoyed and will continue to enjoy the virtual bird festival. The Friends and the Refuge have put together this free family-friendly event for 25 years, and we invite you to learn more about ways you can support the Friends and the Refuge by visiting our website, www.friendsoftualatinrefuge.org. On our website, you can learn about ways to become a Friends member, make a donation, or when we're able to get together again in person, ways to volunteer at the refuge.
So without further ado, we're going to jump right into our session talking about Wapato Lake, as I described a little bit before. Before we do jump out to on the scene, we actually have an introductory video for you to watch to learn a little bit more about the refuge. And to get a little bit of foundational information before we go live to our panelists. So bear with me for just a minute as I get this pulled up. Welcome to Wapato Lake National Wildlife Refuge. I'm Todd McKinney, a park ranger here at the refuge, and I'm happy to introduce you to one of your National Wildlife Refuges. Wapato Lake is located just west of Portland in Gaston, Oregon. We're here at the refuge in the spring of 2021, and we're in the process of restoring it and developing additional public opportunities. The refuge is 950 acres near the Tualatin River. The land we're standing on has a rich Native American history. Wapato Lake is within the ancestral homelands of the Tualatin Kalapuya. This area was at the center of a Tualatin Kalapuya reservation that was negotiated for in the 1850s but never realized. The Tualatin Kalapuya became signatories to the Willamette Valley Treaty of 1855 and were removed to the Grand Ronde Indian Reservation in the winter of 1855 and 1856. Understanding this history and connection to Wapato Lake is important to the refuge. The service is honored to work with the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde as we restore this lake bed.
I'm Curt, wildlife biologist with the Tualatin River National Wildlife Refuge Complex. So this morning we're actually out on the Tualatin River National Wildlife Refuge at a property we refer to as the Olson parcel. And the reason we're out here this morning is to give folks an idea of what Wapato Lake will look like post-restoration. And so, you know, the backdrop here is a fully restored emergent marsh. And so we're about 5-6 years into this project, and just a very highly functioning wetland where we've restored a native plant community. Wapato Lake has just an absolutely fascinating history. Prior to about 1850, just a pristine wetland, emergent marsh that at one point was seasonally connected to the Tualatin River. A very culturally significant spot on the landscape that was used by indigenous people, the Kalapuya. Post 1850, as settlement began, it was about at that time that efforts began to start basically draining the lake bed. And it wasn't until about 1930, local farmers, they erected about 5 miles of levee around Wapato Lake to keep the Tualatin River from backflowing into the site during the winter. Installed a pump station. Every spring for about the past 100+ years, the pumps were kicked on to dry the place out for farming. And that occurred until about 1990. So with the Fish and Wildlife Service's involvement in the project and Wapato Lake becoming a refuge, I like to think of it as we're coming full circle. Our goal in some respects is to restore to the degree practicable some of those ecological characteristics that occurred before Wapato Lake was drained for farming. And so we're kind of in the early stages of getting that restoration process off the ground. So historically, even in an agricultural setting, Wapato Lake has always supported just thousands and thousands of wintering waterfowl, because on an annual basis, the lake bed fills up with water in the winter. And moving forward, even with the restoration, we're anticipating to maintain and likely see an increase in waterfowl use of that site, especially with species like tundra swan and canvasback, which historically used to use the lake bed in larger numbers. But the big change is going to be, currently the lake bed's dry during the spring and summer, and so we'll see a marsh that holds water year round. And so that's where you'll see the big change at Wapato Lake, supporting breeding songbirds, secretive marsh birds like American bitterns and Virginia rails, western pond turtles, red-legged frogs, beaver, and those species that I've mentioned have been absent from the landscape for over 100 years. Given the scale and complexity of this project, the Fish and Wildlife Service couldn't have taken on an endeavor like this alone, and so partners have been absolutely critical to getting us to where we are today. And that goes back 5-6 years. There were some very critical partners that helped us kind of figure out some solutions. The USGS, Clean Water Services, the Joint Water Commission, Ducks Unlimited were all integrally involved to helping us develop alternatives and kind of identify a path forward. And those partnerships continue today. The Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde have been a very important partner, and then our Friends group. So this is a great opportunity to engage local communities in the restoration process and give them some ownership of the refuge.
Since being designated a National Wildlife Refuge in 2013, the refuge has been closed to the public. We've had one season of waterfowl hunting this past fall, and in the near future, additional public access at Wapato Lake Refuge may be available. We have a lot of facilities that are kind of in place right now, and we're looking at how to utilize those to a more efficient way. Then there's a paved path that actually takes you all the way up to the new pedestrian bridge, the only access point for the public on the refuge. Once across the bridge, you will see about 2 miles of trails, a mile that goes to the north and a mile that goes to the south. Our Friends of the Refuge group was instrumental in the development of this trail.
I'm Bonnie Anderson. I'm with Friends of Tualatin River National Wildlife Refuge Complex. We are the volunteer nonprofit organization that helps support the refuge. One of the things we did recently here at Wapato Lake National Wildlife Refuge is write and receive a grant from Washington County Visitors Association for $30,000. That grant allowed for the materials to help construct this almost 2-mile accessible trail out here at Wapato Lake National Wildlife Refuge.
In the coming weeks, the refuge expects to announce a draft environmental assessment which details proposed activities on the refuge. You will have 30 days to review the report and provide your comments to help shape the future of Wapato Lake National Wildlife Refuge. Once published, you can find that information at the link at the bottom of your screen. As we consider opening the refuge up to public access, you play an important role in that decision. We hope to hear from you, and maybe someday soon we'll get to see you in person here at Wapato Lake National Wildlife Refuge. So now we have the, sorry about that, I'm just trying to get everything back up to speed here. I'd like to welcome on Larry Klimek, our project leader at Tualatin River National Wildlife Refuge Complex, which includes Wapato Lake National Wildlife Refuge. Larry, and yeah, there we go. I think they're coming on here. We are gonna, Bonnie and I are gonna say goodbye for now, but I'm gonna turn it over to Larry, and Larry's going to walk us through a few things, and Curt's out there too, so we'll hear from him as well. And I'll be back in just a little bit to moderate some questions. Feel free to ask questions in the Q&A too. Thanks.
All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Larry Klimek. I'm the Refuge Manager here at the Wapato Lake National Wildlife Refuge, and we're coming to you live out here at the refuge itself. And we're here to kind of give you a glimpse of what is going on in the refuge and what's being planned on the refuge as we go forward this year. I have a special guest with me here at this time, and that is Dave Meeker, the mayor of Gaston, Oregon, which the refuge is sitting right adjacent and almost within the city of Gaston. So I'll go ahead and let Dave describe and tell us a little bit about Gaston, Oregon.
Hello, welcome to Gaston. I'm the mayor of a small town in Washington County. We're nestled between Yamhill County and the north part of Washington County. We're surrounded by farmland, forest land, marshland, and any kind of land you can think of after that. This all started by the Native Americans in the area. The Apalati tribe was the last known, and they created the wetlands, and they kept the flooding controlled to where they could farm almost year round. We do have some old structures still standing in Gaston. There's a red house over there. It's been here from day one. There's a purple house over here that's been here since the 30s probably. Over here you can see our grocery store and the building next to it. Those are the old original buildings that are still used to this day. The city is really looking forward to our new addition to us, the Wildlife Refuge. And that's what I'm looking forward to, is the expansion of our city and the happiness of our citizens.
Okay, well, thank you, Dave. We appreciate that kind of synopsis of the area. You know, we look for the refuge to be certainly a community asset for the area, and for it to be for the community to kind of take ownership of the refuge. Since we are so close, as the folks can see, you know, the main street and the highway is just right here at the refuge itself. So we hope to be a good community partner out in this area. one of the things that is a little bit different, this Wapato Lake is also considered to be an urban refuge, which might seem a little contradictory to what we just heard, but there are numerous communities close to the Gaston area. Within about 10 miles just north of here are the towns of Forest Grove and Cornelius, and south of here, Carlton and Yamhill are within about 10 miles. And when you reach out to about 25 miles of here, you start getting the larger communities of Hillsborough and Beaverton and Newburgh south of us and McMinnville. And when you add up the populations of those communities, we're probably closer to 300,000 to 400,000 people. So, and we are then about 30 minutes or about 30 miles outside of the town of Portland, the city of Portland. So we are certainly within driving distance of some large metropolitan areas. So that is where that designation as a urban refuge kind of comes into play in this area. And we are looking as the refuge being out here as being part of the larger landscape. There are a couple other areas out here, natural areas that are run and operated by other entities. The Chehalem Ridge Nature Park is getting ready to open up just a couple of miles from here. That Metro operates, and Henry Hagg Lake is about 5 miles from here, which is a large recreation area. So we kind of see this as a recreational hub for folks to come and enjoy this area. Plus there's numerous wineries in this area. So I think it's going to be, we hope that it develops kind of as a good day destination area that folks will come out and enjoy the natural resources, the wineries, and the other things that are available out here in this absolutely beautiful countryside out here in the Tualatin River Valley. We can now kind of give you a little bit of a look at what we're trying to set up as we're getting the refuge open. So we are looking to begin some public use activities this year and get it open. So if you can see over our shoulder here, we've worked with the city to develop a parking area, a parking lot with restroom facilities. These are all coming directly off of Highway 47, which is the main road that comes through here. From this point, there is a access road that comes, or access trail, I'm sorry, that comes down through here just below this little set of blackberry vines. And it comes down around to over to the backside over here where we have a bridge that goes over Wapato Lake, or Wapato Creek right here. So this will be the primary access for accessing the Wapato Lake National Wildlife Refuge when we get ready to open it up to the public. So people will come in, park here, and then access up here onto the trails, which we'll talk about a little bit more later. So at this point, I think we'll go ahead and shoot it over to Curt, Mykut, our biologist, who's actually out within Wapato Lake somewhere. And he will tell us a little bit more about the restoration activities that are going on out at the lake. So Curt, go ahead and take it away.
Hey, thanks for the introduction, Larry, and good afternoon, everybody. And thank you for joining us this afternoon. Again, my name is Curt Mykut. I'm the wildlife biologist for the Refuge Complex, and it's really an honor to be speaking with you today about Wapato Lake. It's a place that's really near and dear to my heart, having spent the last 6+ years of my life getting to know this place very well. So excited to be here today. Restoring biological value to and providing an opportunity for the public to experience this place that is Wapato Lake has been in the works for a long time, in earnest for about 20 years. Most people don't know, however, that the Fish and Wildlife Service actually expressed interest in establishing a national wildlife refuge as early as the 1960s. So, you know, this has been a long time coming. So I'm proud to say that we're not only within reach of opening Wapato Lake for the public to enjoy, as Larry just mentioned, but also rehabilitating the land so that it once again produces its namesake, the Wapato plant, among a number of other native wildlife plant species, and so that it also supports an abundance of wetland-dependent wildlife. Today, I want to share a little bit about how we're getting to that end goal and kind of give you a glimpse or behind the scenes of how that restoration planning process unfolded. I think with the introductory video, you got a good sense of what we're anticipating post-restoration, but I think it's really important to set the stage for how we got to that point. So how do you even determine where to start restoring an 800-acre wetland system? So it's a pretty big undertaking. Well, the starting point was really gaining a better understanding of Wapato Lake's history. And for me, this was probably the most fascinating component of the restoration planning process. So gleaning from old government land office survey records from the late 1800s, looking at journal entries from Hudson Bay Company trappers, and having conversations with members of the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde, whose ancestors occupied the land and utilized Wapato Lake prior to white settlement in about 1850. And what we know from these sources is that Wapato Lake was inundated throughout the year, and so there was water lying on the landscape year-round. At one time, it was even seasonally connected to the Tualatin River, and that was namely during high winter and spring flows in the river. And as you heard, supported large numbers of waterfowl. I had mentioned in the video the canvasbacks that utilized Wapato Lake and sought out the Wapato tuber as a food source, over a century ago. And we don't see them commonly in the Willamette Valley anymore. And further, because we know it supported the Wapato plant and other reeds and grasses, as one journal entry reads, we think it was more likely a shallow marsh than a deep lake system. But a lot has occurred between 1850 and today. And so talked a little bit about in the video, the levee system that was erected around Wapato Lake, about 5+ miles of levee, which basically severed the lake's connection to the Tualatin River, as well as a number of other small tributary creeks. Native plant communities were cleared from the landscape, and then a pump station was installed to drain the lake annually to support summer farming operations. And then we also have a big irrigation canal that now exists around most of the lake bed. So how do we turn back the clock to recreate the Wapato Lake that once existed, especially considering the modifications that have occurred? And so it really came down to gaining an understanding of Wapato Lake's hydrology. So for example, asking questions like, when does Wapato Lake fill up with water? How deep does it get at the different times of year? Can it hold water year round? Does that water evaporate during the summer? And then what would happen if we removed some of the levee system to attempt to reconnect Wapato Lake to the river? What impacts would that have? And so the answers to these questions really helped us hone in on a strategy that would result in conditions favoring a diversity of plants that grow in shallow wetlands, including the Wapato plant, and then in turn support a wide diversity of wetland dependent wildlife. So bear with me on this one, especially for folks who tuned into the Chicken Creek restoration presentation yesterday, because what I'm about to say may contradict the approach that we're taking with that project. But ironically, at Wapato Lake, what we determined by studying the system's hydrology is that actually maintaining that infrastructure that was built to tame the lake bed, if you will, could also be used to our advantage to restore the lake bed. And there's a reason for that, and that reason is tied to a process called subsidence. And so where the land is basically compressing and lowering in elevation as a result of draining the lake for nearly a century, exposing the peat soils of the wetland to oxygen every year. And then that's exacerbated with annual farming and farming equipment running over the ground for over a century, and that material just gradually breaking down and compressing over time. And it's estimated that the lake bed is dropped by about 5 feet during this time period. And so what that means is the bathtub that is Wapato Lake has basically gotten deeper and sits even lower on the landscape than it once did. And so the impact is that we have more and deeper water in Wapato Lake, particularly under a scenario where levee infrastructure is removed and we reconnect Wapato Lake to the Tualatin River. And so what our modeling suggested is that during the growing season, so this time of year through late September, the average water depths across much of the lake bed under that particular scenario would be about 4 to 5 feet deep. And so that really would have limited our ability to support an emergent marsh, namely because plants like Wapato, cattail, bulrush really can't grow in water that deep. And then that in turn has ramifications on wildlife that we can expect to see using the site throughout the year. And so in a nutshell, a lower diversity plant community equals lower diversity wildlife. Another important consideration that we looked at was determining what would happen during the winter with the levees removed. And what we found was that water depths would range between 8 to 10 feet. And so thus limiting the value of Wapato Lake to the thousands of dabbling ducks that show up to feed in the winter. So as a result, our restoration and management strategy entails actually maintaining the levee infrastructure and using the pump system to control water levels in the lake bed. And so even though, I mentioned Wapato no longer has that connection with the river due to the levee system, it still does fill up on an annual basis with rainwater every year. So really our strategy entails lowering the water levels in Wapato Lake during this time of year to a level that's conducive to supporting a marsh-like plant community. So where are we in the process? So we're about a year away from managing Wapato Lake so that it retains water year round. And so for the past couple of years, we've continued to drain Wapato Lake for a couple of reasons. One, so we had better access to complete some of the infrastructure work that Larry's mentioned, and I think we'll talk a little bit more about here shortly. But more importantly, we've been preparing the lake bed for restoration of native plant communities. And so namely, making efforts to reduce the cover of non-native invasive plants like reed canary grass and purple loosestrife, which tend to form these large monocultures and really just take over and dominate the system. And so what we're trying to do is at least reduce the cover of those species and make room for a broader diversity of our native wetland plants. And then those native wetland plants, there's a couple of different ways that we see those native wetland plants reemerging on the landscape. So already as a result of ceasing farming operations and addressing the invasive plant issue, we're seeing native plants return to the site naturally. And so I've strategically placed myself in this location so folks can get a glimpse of, and this is really exciting. This is probably the second year that we've observed this, but we're seeing Sagittaria latifolia, or the common name Wapato, starting to reemerge naturally in the lake bed. And you see patches like this scattered throughout the lake bottom. And so in areas where we're not observing that, what we call natural recruitment of native plants, we'll kind of help kickstart the system by either seeding, installing plugs, or planting small bare root trees and shrubs. And a lot of that planting and seeding work will actually begin this fall and into winter. I've already talked a little bit about in the video kind of what we'll expect to see post-restoration. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but I'll just reiterate that this is the time of year where we're really going to see the big changes at Wapato Lake, because this has really been a sterile landscape in that period March through October for the past 100 years because it was farmed. But as these native plant communities begin to reestablish on the landscape and we get water back on the site, it's going to, it'll support just a number of breeding or native species, breeding opportunities for native species. I apologize. Breeding waterfowl, things like Virginia rail, American bittern. We expect western pond turtles, red-legged frogs to show back up. Willow flycatchers, yellow-breasted chat. So it'll be a drastic difference to what we've seen out on the site here during the spring and summer, even over the past 10 years. And so, like most of the conservation work the refuge is doing, and I know you've heard it in the video and you're probably going to hear everybody else talk about this, but I can't thank partners enough. And so I'm gonna do it one more time, because we could not have done any of this is a heavy lift, restoring an 800-acre marsh, and we've been very fortunate with this project to have had a lot of support, both in the form of technical expertise and financial support. So again, a huge thank you to the U.S. Geological Survey, Clean Water Services, Joint Water Commission, Ducks Unlimited, Intel, Tualatin and Soil and Water Conservation District, Columbia Land Trust, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Tualatin Valley Irrigation District, the City of Gaston, and last but not least, the Friends of the Tualatin River National Wildlife Refuge. And with that, I think I'm going to kick it back over to Larry and Alan to talk a little bit more about the recreational opportunities at Wapato Lake. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Curt. Appreciate that synopsis of the restoration activities. And as you mentioned, partners are a critical aspect of what we're able to do out here on this refuge and the Tualatin River Refuge. And with me today is Alan Christensen, who is the former president of the Friends Group and a board member, to tell us a little bit about the Friends Group that assists us with essentially every aspect of our work that we do on these refuges. So Alan, you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Thank you, Larry. Friends Group is a nonprofit organization of people that love wildlife, that love the habitat they live in, and are interested in learning more about wildlife and working with the Fish and Wildlife Service. Our official name is Friends of the Tualatin River National Wildlife Refuge Complex. And I'll quickly go over a few of the things we've done at Tualatin, which is near Sherwood. We help with educational programs for people of all ages. We have puddle stompers for ages 3 to 5, and we have educational drop-in days for high school and middle school. And we teach things in the summer like owl prowl, and a lot of adults show up for those things. It's one of the things we enjoy the most. We also get involved in habitat restoration and planting on the refuges. And then one of the bigger items that's been mentioned a couple of times is our ability as a nonprofit to seek grant money and help that money assist the refuge with the things that they want to do. Here today at Wapato, we're standing on a trail that was built with funds from the Washington County Visitors Association through the Friends Group to help the refuge get ready for opening to the public. One of the things that we are looking forward to out here at Wapato is to be able to identify some people in the community that would like to become members of Friends and work with them at Wapato to create some of the similar programs that we've had at Tualatin. Educational programs, adult and young, and being so close to Gaston, it looks like a beautiful opportunity for schools to be involved and work out here. In terms of our membership, there's about 400 currently, and we're looking for members. So we're hoping that people in Gaston will learn about this opportunity and join us, particularly if they like what they see on the refuge and they want to get involved in its future management. They're going to be in a position to actually watch Wapato evolve over time from what it was to what it will be. And you heard what Curt had to say about a lot of the plans. That's a quick overview. Is there anything overlooked, Larry?
No, I think that kind of covers it. So thank you very much. We're at kind of a really exciting time in the process of developing the Wapato Lake National Wildlife Refuge. As you heard from Curt, the active restoration that's going on, that this place will be, transformed in, 5 years, 10 years. And we would certainly encourage everybody to come out now and see what it looks like once we get it open and see what that difference is and to follow those differences. And the second component is then opening up the refuge to the public and getting the public out here to enjoy, the National Wildlife Refuge and the public lands that belong to all of us. And as a part of that process to do that, we've started, as we showed earlier, putting in some infrastructure and some facilities to help facilitate that process. Another piece that we're doing that was already mentioned was the trail. So the primary access for the refuge is going to be on top of the levee system that's here. And we are developing this trail system, a hiking trail on top of the levee that we currently have approximately 2 miles of it done. That's a hard rock surface that goes from the bridge that we showed earlier each way for a mile. And then that trail will also extend another 1.5 miles south of where we are standing. Well, it'll be about 2.5 miles south of here. So when we initially open up the refuge, we'll have approximately 3.5 miles of trail available for the public to walk on.
And Larry, could I point out this 2 miles is ADA compliant, is it not?
That's correct. Yes, it is a hard packed surface that wheelchairs and navigate, including the walkway and the bridge coming up to this area. Our long-term plans are to eventually have a trail that goes completely around the wetland area. That trail will eventually be between 5 and 5.5 miles long. It will be a loop trail. That will probably be several years down the road as we finish acquiring lands and develop that trail out. But before we can do that, we need to go ahead and get the refuge open to the public. National wildlife refuges are closed until they're opened through a process. So we are looking to, we've generated an environmental assessment for opening up the refuge to primarily hiking and photography and bird watching from this trail system. And we hope to have that out to the public during the month of June. And we encourage everyone that's listening to this and anyone that has any interest in doing activities out here on the refuge to take a look at that document and provide us your suggestions on what you would like to see us do out here on the refuge as it relates to public use activities.
Larry, where could they find that document?
They will be able to go onto our website, go onto Wapato Lake National Wildlife Refuge. If you Google that, it will be on that website. And we really encourage everybody to go in, read the document and make your comments, because that's how we will determine what we ultimately plan to do out here. It will be based on people's comments and looking at what the community would like to see and what we can do that melds in and combines up with the restoration activities that we're doing out here. So as I said, we really want to encourage people to be a part of the solution and a part of the programs that we're doing out here. Now, we did start with one activity related to public use last fall. We were able to open up the refuge for the first time for waterfowl hunting. And that was a commitment we made as an agency. Several years ago, the refuge was first being developed that we permit waterfowl hunting out here on the refuge. And so we were able last year to have the first public waterfowl hunt out on the refuge. And we learned a lot from that, and we are going to be making a few modifications from that. We will be continuing that activity as we go forward. And the rest of the activities will then be this program. So, yes, we did show that there's a lot of interest. I believe we had about 1,300 applications for approximately 120 spots. So there was certainly a lot of interest, a lot of local interest. The communities, the stores, as Dave was talking about, were interested in folks being out here and being a part of bringing new people to the area, learning about the area. So that's one of the exciting things about opening the refuge is having that available. So I think we're at the point where questions.
I'd like to encourage you to consider becoming a member of Friends, because you have access to folks like Larry and Curt to answer questions. Larry attends our monthly board meeting, and we learn all sorts of things about what's going on at the refuge, what the plans are. It's a first-hand opportunity to be a part of the development of this refuge.
Yes, and I would further say that there's quite a few programs and different activities that we do on the refuge that we couldn't do without the Friends groups. They are a very integral part of what we are doing here on the refuge. So we would certainly encourage folks to volunteer when we put out those calls and to potentially become members of the Friends group also. So I will now kick it back to Todd to see if we have any questions, and I'll invite Dave Mykut, the mayor of Gaston, to join us. And Curt, I know is online, and fire away with any questions that you have about what's going on out here at Wapato Lake.
Awesome. So thank you all. Thanks our panelists for sharing all that information. Really good stuff, and really appreciate it. If you want to maybe mute yourselves until I kind of call on you. Larry's camera is getting a lot of wind the last 2 minutes or so. It was hard to hear. So speak up if you do answer a question. We got a few coming in. So I'll start out here. It's got a great presentation, just so you know. will the lake bed ever be able to support native fish communities? Maybe I'll send that one over to Curt. Do you want to take that one, Curt?
Absolutely. And the wind's not too burdensome, is it? Okay, great. Yeah, it's a fantastic question, and it's something that before we landed on our preferred restoration alternative, our thought was that we were going down the avenue of truly restoring Wapato Lake to where we had that restored connection to the Tualatin River, and that this place would once again provide off-channel habitat for overwintering fish like steelhead and cutthroat trout, for example. For the foreseeable future, that won't be a possibility, because with the levee system being maintained in place, Wapato Lake will maintain its disconnection from the Tualatin River. It's hard to say, maybe 50 years down the road, if we see some accretion of the land surface in the lake bed that would still give us the ability to maintain those diverse marsh plant communities. There may be an opportunity at some point in the future to make that connection and not have to rely on that pump system. But another big consideration was, there's a lot of non-native fish species in the Tualatin River system. And one in particular that we were very concerned about with this project when we were thinking about that connection to the river is carp. And they have the tendency to really wreak havoc on these marsh plant communities. And so, between that and not being able to achieve the desired water levels that we're going to support our restoration goals, for the foreseeable future, this will not be a place that supports native fish communities.
Excellent. Thank you, Curt. I don't know did we lose Larry and the crew there? Okay, you can leave the camera on. It's okay. So maybe, if maybe another one for you, Curt, and then I got one for the panel there. But Curt, maybe or both, we both have an answer, Larry and Curt. How might new visitor use impact wildlife at Wapato Lake?
Yeah, I guess I'll take a crack first, and then I'll let Larry provide his insight. At this stage of the game, honestly, we don't really have a firm handle on that. Wapato Lake it's a big space, a big broad space on the landscape, and the levee footprint where the public will mostly have their access from is pretty small in comparison to the larger lake bed. So, I feel like there'll be maintenance of a pretty big distance between visitors and the area that wildlife will be utilizing on a regular basis. Where I see the potential for more disturbance is during the winter time, when we have large flocks of waterfowl gathering in the lake bed, November through April. And that's just something right now we don't have a handle on, and it's something we plan to monitor as all of this unfolds. So, we'll certainly be looking at kind of implementing adaptive management principles to mitigate for anything that we're seeing as having a negative impact on wildlife at the refuge.
Yeah, I would echo what Curt said, and that we will be monitoring as we go forward, and as the vegetation gets thicker and higher out there, it will provide a lot of hiding places and places of where the wildlife can go, even though there are people upon the levee. And we are looking at that as part of the public use plan, and the impacts and effects will be, what effects will having the public out here on the levee have on the wildlife. Because wildlife is our priority here on the refuge, but we think we will be able to have both, and that will be our plan. And we'll take a look at what we get back for responses within our documents, and we'll go forward from there.
Awesome. So we've got a question in here. Someone's asking if would the public be allowed to collect things on the refuge. I think they might be mentioning, like thinking about maybe taking plants or maybe animals or things like that from the refuge. Maybe Larry, you want to talk about that and the kind of the policies and things behind that in terms of federal lands in general?
Yeah, on a national wildlife refuge, it's very straightforward. Nothing can be collected or removed from a national wildlife refuge that isn't within a sanctioned activity, such as hunting, fishing, something along those lines. So there is no plant collecting, no wildlife collecting, and that also goes to the effect that sometimes we have problems with people bringing out wildlife and dropping them off on the refuge or introducing them on the refuge. That is also an activity that's not permitted. So we are trying to maintain the native flora and fauna, the plants and animals, and that's really important for what we're doing. And so you also cannot bring out wildlife and introduce them to the refuge. So yeah, essentially no collecting of any types of materials off the refuge.
Thanks, Larry. So we got another one. We got some more questions rolling in, so this is good. We got good time still to go through if our panelists are still feeling like they want to answer these. Can you, someone's asking if you can repeat how large the project is. It sounds huge, so I'd maybe provide the scope maybe between the restoration, but also the visitor services aspect as well.
Okay, well, let me go ahead and just hit the visitor services aspect. To begin with, as we are starting, that we hope that later this summer that we will have approximately 3.5 miles of trail available for the public to walk on. And then eventually, at some point in the future, that could be expanded to a 5-mile loop trail. But this summer, we'd be looking at 3.5 miles confined to the top of the levees is what we're looking at.
Yeah, so I can talk a little bit about the restoration footprint. So there's a little bit of nuance to this. So the 800 acres is the number we use, and that 800 acres is associated with the footprint of Wapato Lake that's confined within that 5-mile levee system, and essentially aligns with the Fish and Wildlife Services ownership within Wapato Lake. But I will mention that historically, Wapato Lake was likely larger than that 800-acre footprint, at least seasonally. We know to the south and north, this entire valley flooded, and there are some low spots that were likely connected to this area within the 800 acres. The other thing that I'll mention that we haven't talked about in this presentation, there is a broader footprint that the Fish and Wildlife Services is operating within at Wapato Lake National Wildlife Refuge. So we talk about Wapato Lake proper and that 800 acres, but we actually have an established 4,300 acre acquisition boundary. And basically that within that boundary, that gives us the ability to work cooperatively with private landowners. And if there's a willingness from a landowner to sell within that 4,300 acre footprint, into the future, we have an opportunity to pretty substantially expand the size of Wapato Lake National Wildlife Refuge. But the restoration itself is about 800 acres, and I think Todd hit on in the video that currently within that 4,300, we own about 950 acres. And so we have a few pieces of property, more upland type property on the periphery of Wapato Lake.
Wonderful, thank you both. And we got a question here for the mayor, and got actually a couple kind of in the same vein, and they're basically wondering if you have a feel for the excitement level or interest from the folks that live there in Gaston about having the refuge in their backyard, and if anything that you want to share about that.
9 out of 10 people are for it in town.
Awesome. All right.
So there's a lot of interest in it.
Yes, everybody's been looking at this for years, and now they're finally getting they're finally resolving an issue of flooding. But you guys are doing so much work out here. The city is really happy. A lot of people passing through town ask what's going on out here, so we have a chance to sell our own product. Just a small town.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. So, Larry, I'm going to send this one to you real quick. There's a couple questions that have come in. When you were talking about the hunting, that's when the wind really kicked in, so it was hard to hear. And so we've got a couple questions in here just about waterfowl hunting at the refuge and hunting at the refuge in general. Maybe you can kind of cover that part again, because we can hear you a little bit better now. So. Okay.
Yeah, we implemented a waterfowl hunting program last year that we'll be carrying on into the future. The kind of logistics of it are that we hunt 3 days a week. It's on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. The refuge will be open to the public on those days when there is not active hunting going on. And this last year, because we're still in the restoration phase, we started the hunting in mid-December, which we'll be doing that way again this coming waterfowl hunt season. And once we start keeping the lake in a flooded condition, as Curt described earlier, then we will start the hunting during the waterfowl hunt season, which generally starts in October and would run until January. And like I said, it's an activity that is very much in this area. There are not very many public areas where people can do waterfowl hunting. So we're glad that we're able to provide that activity out here at the refuge.
And to follow up, Curt, this could be for you, I think. Someone along the hunting line, would this have it seems like hunting would have scare a lot of other wildlife in the area and maybe have an impact on waterfowl in general. So can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, I was going to ask if I could interject because I feel like I glossed over that a little bit in my previous answer. Because we did implement that. So we have 1 year under our belt. Based on the process we went through to get waterfowl hunting open to the public, we felt like we have the ability. And again, my answer is going to be kind of similar. I mean, there's no question that hunting 3 days a week and birds being shot at is going to have a disturbance. But we feel like with the size of Wapato Lake and over 60% of it being designated as a true sanctuary where no hunting can occur, that we have ample space to allow birds to move into other areas. But again, one season to judge from, and like other public uses, we plan to monitor that. And if there's a need for adaptive management to mitigate for disturbance that seems to be too excessive, we're certainly going to evaluate that. But at this time, it's hard to say with only one season having been conducted at this point. But it's something we're going to be keeping a close eye on for sure.
Thank you both. Next question here. Oh, Larry, do you have something?
Yeah, let me just add to that just a little bit so people would understand the scale. We have 6 hunting blinds on the refuge, and that's kind of where we're at this point as we go forward with the hunting, as we're looking at the effects of the hunting. So it's the refuge is not covered with blinds, and as Curt said, 60% of the refuge has no activity on it during that time either. So we feel like that does give the wildlife a place to move away from the hunting in those areas, so that we will still have an abundance of wildlife out here on the refuge.
Thanks. Next question we'll send over to Alan, actually. Alan, someone's asking about couple, I guess, more or less how someone can become a Friends member, and then where they can just find more information about the Friends group in general and what all the Friends group is about.
Yeah, that's a great question. Friends has a really informative website. Sorry, I can't quote the address to you. I've got it on my board.
I'll put it in the chat, please.
Okay, so you can go into that website and there's information on how to join. There's information on what we do. There's information on the refuge. It's very informative. And I would encourage anybody that's interested to go in and take a look.
Thanks, Alan. There's a couple questions. I'm going to kind of sum them up together, but essentially they're asking about volunteer opportunities, whether it's with plantings potentially upcoming in the future, restoration work, or even more in our visitor service realm. So maybe to the both Larry and Curt, if you both want to tackle that one, just maybe what might be coming online for visitors, for volunteering.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and take first shot at it. We depend a lot on volunteers. We have a small refuge staff, so volunteers contribute a lot to what we're able to accomplish out here. When we look at like the statistics for the Tualatin Refuge, when we count up all the volunteer hours, it ends up being about between 6 and 7 employees time a year. So it is very significant. And we would think out here at Wapato Lake, the restoration planting stuff that Curt can reflect on a little bit more, give a little more detail, but also folks that are out helping with maintenance work. We have a program called Trail Rovers where folks just walk the trail and provide information to the public and tell them about what's going on. We have not gotten into a lot of the volunteer program here because primarily the pandemic situation. So with that kind of starting to maybe go in the right direction of where we'd like it, we'll be starting to look at promoting volunteerism out here a little bit more. We also use volunteers a lot in our environmental education programs and with a lot of the different things that we have going on. So really appreciate the volunteers, and as I said, we could not do what we accomplish out here without the volunteers helping out here and kind of making the refuge theirs and make it really a community asset.
And Todd, I can just speak real quickly to opportunities on the horizon. No dates at this point locked in, but I'd say, check back in, check the Wapato Lake National Wildlife Refuge or Tualatin River National Wildlife Refuge or Friends website starting this fall. For the foreseeable future, I mean, over the next 2 years, for sure, we'll be relying on volunteer crews to do planting activities in the winter. So installing bare root trees and shrubs and willow cuttings. So that's the big thing that comes to mind. And like I said, no dates have been set at this point, but I anticipate by December, January that we'll be underway with those activities.
Excellent. So we just got a couple minutes before we need to kind of wrap up and on to our next session. And so just a question that's come up here is someone wants to know about fishing. And I'm sorry, there's a couple more questions lingering, but sorry we can't get to those today. But feel free to reach out to the refuge if you want to follow up with some of these questions. We'd be happy to answer them. Someone's asking, will the refuge be opened up to fishing?
That will be one of those questions that we will address within the environmental documents that we're looking at that I mentioned earlier as far as getting the refuge opened up. So if you have an interest in fishing, and there has been some interest in Wapato Creek, which is the creek that goes outside the levee, for the potential for fishing there. One of the issues that we've looked at is where are there good spots to access fishing, to the creek. We are going to be restoring the levee banks. So that does present some problems as far as trying to find good places to access, the fishing activity. But if you have an interest in fishing, be sure and make those interests known within the process when we're out for that comment period. And we will look at, if it makes sense right now, or if it's something, we'll look at into the future to see what we can develop. Because once we have it open to fishing, we need to provide reasonable access and reasonable facilities to do that fishing from. And so, we would be looking at those types of things as we go forward with managing the refuge into the future.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much. It's 2 o'clock and we got our next session starting here in just a few minutes. And we want to take a minute just to quickly wrap up to thank the 4 of you for being out there. And I know Carly's behind the scenes there too. So thank you, Carly. Mayor Meeker, thank you for coming out today to spend some time with us, and Alan as well. Really appreciate it. And Larry and Curt for taking the time on this Saturday to help us learn about Wapato Lake National Wildlife Refuge. So we're very grateful for your time and wonderful information. There's a few comments in here in the Q&A about how informative this was, and folks are just grateful to hear all the news coming from Wapato Lake National Wildlife Refuge. So thank you very much. I'm going to turn it over to Bonnie.
And for everyone that's going to be joining us for our last segment, I apologize. We're going to start just a few minutes late. This segment ran just a few minutes over. So just stay tuned and we'll get that one keyed up. Again, thank you to Curt, to the mayor, to Larry, to Alan, and to Carly. And I just want to make a public statement to Todd. It's been a real joy being the co-chair with you for this virtual bird festival for 2021. Hopefully next year we'll be live and in person back at Walter River National Wildlife Refuge. Always the 3rd Saturday in May.
It's been a blast. Thanks, Bonnie.